The most important topic of today, in my opinion. But first of all, Cerys, do you just want to do a bit of an introduction about who you are and who you represent?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. My name is Cerys Williams. I am the Finance Partnership Manager at Sero. So, Sero, we are an energy services provider, but we are also a digital technology specialist in zero carbon or low carbon technology. So, we work with a variety of partners. So, we work with new build developers. We work with social landlords. We're starting to work with the homeowner occupied sector and the private landlord sector. So we're really sort of trying to help across all aspects to move decarbonisation in the right direction.
Excellent. And how long have you been around?
So Sero was established in 2017. We're based in Cardiff. Our founders are James Williams and Andy Sutton, and I've been there for sort of just coming up to 3.5 years.
Excellent. Well, good stuff. So as I said, I think this is the most important session, but I'll start by asking you a question, which is, can you tell us why you think energy efficiency in homes is such an important topic, please?
Of course, yeah. So it's been mentioned a few times this morning, the cost of living crisis, the fuel crisis that we're currently at the very beginning of. I mean, most of us are probably trying to hold off putting our heating on right now. It's probably more than ever a case of chuck another layer on. But yes, we're going into the first winter where we're seeing that prices per kilowatt hour of energy compared to last year have risen by 13 pence per kilowatt hour, and the standing charge that you're paying on your meter is raised by 23 pence a day. So, you know, we're looking at severely increased costs of heating ourselves throughout this winter, so we need to do something.
Yep.
I mean, that's not to mention the fact that we are legally obligated to be net zero carbon by 2050. We'll do some quick maths here. So we've got just over 27 years until 2050.
Yep.
There are roughly between 27 and 29 million residential properties within the UK. We'll go 27 for the quick maths. So that's 1 million properties a year that we need to be retrofitting now in order to hit net zero carbon by 2050. That's over 19,000 properties a week that we need to be retrofitting. And I think you and I both know that 19,000 properties a week are not being retrofitted at the moment. So for every week that we go on not retrofitting our properties, we're just getting into
19,000.
Well, we're just getting into a bigger and bigger deficit.
Yeah. So you focused a lot on the, energy, zero, the bigger picture though. I mean, how about the bigger picture implications? Is that part of your purpose?
Absolutely.
How would you position that?
So, I mean, looking at the bigger picture, I've been crunching some numbers this week, specifically looking at the buy-to-let sector, because those are the ones that are going to be legislated first. I mean, homeowner occupiers are not going to be subject to MEES, minimum energy efficiency standards, before landlords. MEES was introduced in 2018, as I'm sure you all know, when the landlords had to increase their property's EPC to a staggering EPC of E. Whoa. It only goes to G. So, and I was at the time, I managed an estate agency for 5 years. I was at, I was going to say coalface then, but I was at the forefront of that rollout of MEES legislation, and landlords were outraged that they had to comply to an EPC-E, whereas now it's proposed, not legislated yet, fingers crossed, bated breath and all that. But yes, so minimum energy efficiency standards are likely to be increased to EPC-C for new tenancies in and around 2025, probably more like 2026. Yep. And then for existing tenancies, 2028. So a jump from EPC-E to EPC-C it's a big jump. It's a big ask. Now, bearing in mind that we're already placing mortgages for buy-to-let landlords that are likely to see that term. So when those properties come to remortgage, will those properties still be compliant? Will they be an asset for that landlord to be able to re-tenant? So looking at lending figures for this year alone, and obviously the year's not out, but for the first 3 quarters of this year, there's been just over £660 million worth of mortgages placed for buy-to-let specifically. If we look at the mortgage sector, the private rental sector being about 67% of them being EPC D or lower, that means if we use this year's figures alone on buy-to-let lending, £444 million of the mortgages that we've placed so far this year won't be compliant when MEES increases comes in, and that's just this year.
Sure, got it. And I'm going to just give a bit of a lender take
Yeah, no, please do.
on the big picture, because I mean, all lenders, all big firms effectively will have an ESG framework, environmental, social and governance frameworks around this. And I think quite a bit about the big global perspective. And when you look around at things like, the melting of ice caps, sea rise, the potential damage that creates to coastal towns, we're seeing all of that around the world. We're seeing overheating in Europe. We saw the hottest temperatures in the UK last year, for God's sake. So, I know it's a controversial topic, but the more I look at evidence and scientific evidence, the more you go, blimey, we've got something here that we've got to face into. And I think keeping that commitment of 1.5% degrees it's going to take us all to play a part.
Yeah.
In particular, the wealthier countries like us, I think. So housing for me is an important part of that, because is it about 20% of UK carbon emissions in housing?
Yes, it's from housing, and the decarbonisation of residential property is not a technical issue. We have the solutions. We've had the solutions. A lot of these are established technologies that have been installed for the last 20 or 30 years. They're tried, they're tested. Yes, of course, there are some newer technologies, some groundbreaking. There will also be developments in technologies. But the worst thing we can do is nothing. The Bank of England ran some stress tests, and if we deferred net zero by 10 years, so instead of 2050, we deferred it to 2060, that would cost over £110 billion in additional costs. If we were to take no action whatsoever, that would then increase to over 350, I think, billion pounds worth of costs of inaction. So the worst thing we can do right now is nothing.
Yeah, completely agree. And from your perspective, what do you think what are the big barriers? I think we can all see the benefit of having highly efficient homes, but what's stopping us getting there? What is it that stops homeowners actually taking the steps to deliver that?
I think there is a mass education piece that needs to be undertaken, because most people are blissfully unaware that there is a problem. I'm sure that homeowner occupiers across the UK probably don't realise that there is an onus on them to decarbonise their properties by 2050. And not only that, if we look at it at the shorter term, lenders are starting to be obligated to, as you say, have ESG targets, and the PRA are asking for annual reports on the impact of risk and climate risk, specifically on the back book that they're lending to. There's a target that lenders should be seeking to report a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. Mm-hmm. Well, in order to do that, surely the occupants of those properties need to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions of those properties by 70%.
Yep.
Now, if we look at, I know before the mortgage market was on fire, there were 10-year fixed mortgages. So someone in a 10-year fixed mortgage, coming out of that mortgage, if we say it was placed this year, that's 2032. So they've got 3 years then to reduce their home's carbon emissions by 70%. Wow. That is a very tall ask. If you've got from now until 2035, then of course you can start building an action plan. You can align it with general maintenance. You can do all of those things because you've got the plan. Yep. If you aren't being advised that this is coming down the tracks, if you don't know that this is going to bite you in the bum, then that's going to be a pretty nasty shock, and a costly shock as well. Whereas if you can spread that investment over this time, then it's going to be for the greater good.
Sure. So I get it. So there's definitely an education part. And just from a lender perspective, so people are aware, I mean, this is a massive topic for lenders because, as Cerys mentioned, we've been asked to look at targets, and pretty firm targets, on our back book of properties to improve the efficiency on that back book. And from a Lloyds perspective, we have the biggest back book, as you would imagine. So it's a massive task. And I think one of the things on my mind, Cerys, is, if you think of an average person in a home, I'm thinking of me, you sort of wake up in your house, and if you've got £20,000 to spend, you're probably thinking, I'll have a holiday, I'll put a new kitchen in. You're probably not thinking, I'll do cavity wall insulation and an air source heat pump.
No.
So how do we overcome that kind of inertia, do you think?
So Sero specifically are working with a variety of demographics. So as I mentioned previously, we're just getting into the homeowner occupier and the private rental sector audiences via lenders. So we're not B2C, we are B2B2C. And we are basically developing what's called a pathway to zero. So we are undertaking a really thorough analysis of properties, and then we are guiding homeowner occupiers and private landlords in understanding the current energy efficiency of that property, so their carbon baseline, and then talking them through the appropriate measures for that property, because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution here. And there are so many tools out there at the moment that I see new ones every week where people can type in their address and it'll bring up their EPC data and it will tell them, oh, well, you just do this, this, and this. That's great, but the data quality that is driven by those tools isn't as accurate as you would like it to be. So telling somebody that they should get cavity wall insulation in a property that doesn't have a cavity, as one of our retrofit assessors...
Could be a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one of our retrofit assessors in Sero did sort of went, oh, a new tool, blah, blah. Oh, this isn't great. So yeah, we look at each house individually, and of course that can be modelled out into archetypes. So if you're looking at properties that were built in the same sort of decade, that have the same house type or construction type, then you can start to build archetypes and have an informed sort of view on probable pathways to zero. But the most robust way of doing it is to look at a property, to have it surveyed, and then to map out from now until whatever date before 2050, that homeowner needs to undertake, because it's not just about the measures that you undertake, it's also the sequencing of those measures. So it's really important that you look at the fabric of the property first, because it's all well and good having access to air source heat pumps or, you know, all the fandango things, but if you're putting that into a property that isn't ready for that yet, if it's a really leaky, you know, inefficient property in itself, the windows, the roof, everything is just emitting all of that heat that you're generating, then it's going to be horribly inefficient to run that air source heat pump. So you need to look at the fabric first and then...
Got it. Fabric first, I've heard a lot of. So what does a customer get then that goes through your proposition, your service? What does the customer output look like?
So what we're looking at the moment, because it's still very much in the pilot phases, we're trying to work with lenders to understand what they need for themselves in order to adhere to all these reporting obligations that are being thrust upon them, but also then creating an output that is palatable for a homeowner occupier. So we love an infographic. We're very visual. It was mentioned earlier that the UK's average reading age is about 9. So we like to make it really, really simple for people to digest. So, you know, we tell them the current EPC rating of their property, because as much as I'm not a great fan of EPCs, because they're not being used now for the purpose that they were originally developed, but they are a metric that people recognize, and, you know, they are what they are. So we demonstrate the EPC of the current property's energy efficiency, the SAP rating, the annual CO2 emissions, the space heating demand, and the annual cost. And then we look at that. So we've got a really clever digital tool that looks at energy pricing and the carbon intensity of the national grid from now until 2050 at 15-minute intervals. So we can track that property's decarbonisation journey in line with the decarbonisation of the national grid, so that we can then say, okay, well, if you were to apply step 1 of your pathway to zero, that would have this impact on all of those metrics. And then in 3 years' time, when you're ready to trigger step 2, you'll be going from here, which is increased from your baseline, but then you'll be going to here, and we'll give them another example of that metric.
So sorry to step, it sounds like a mega detail, lots of data. As a data geek, it might be really helpful, but I'm quite simple. Would it tell me what do I need to spend my money on to make my home more efficient?
Yes, it gives you the capital cost, and it gives you the breakdown of what the decarbonisation measure is. It gives you a little very high level overview of what that is. It also tells you what that means to you. So, you know, this will take one person a day to install in your property. Gives you the capital cost.
It's quite practical, quite practical.
Yes, we're really trying to make it as simple as possible.
And does it go as far as saying, and here's some people that could do it, or is it not at that point yet?
We're building that. So we work with social landlords, as I mentioned, and you know, they've got the benefit of scale. So they have better opportunities for pricing and things, but we are building a repository of trusted tradespeople, people that we know are undertaking these retrofits and are undertaking them successfully, because there's nothing worse than spending that money and having somebody install either the wrong measure or install the right measure incorrectly.
Yeah, there's a question about green lending actually, but I did hear a story that a lender in the past offered green mortgages and didn't do what you described, and found out that after the event people were driving around in their 3-litre solar panels effectively. They spent it on the wrong thing, but that's really important. So there's loads of questions, but one last one. So why is this an important conversation for mortgage advisors?
Because you guys are so key in delivering this message. You guys are the trusted fountains of knowledge, and you are basically the ones that need to start planting the seed. It may not be that you're trying to sell them a green mortgage this time, but surely it's within your interest and theirs for them to understand that, you know, mortgages today are just dipping a toe into energy efficiency, but mortgages in 5 years' time, well, if you haven't got an energy efficient property to either sell or to buy, how will that potentially impact the rates that you can have, the saleability of your property? I'll very quickly say the Valuer project that I undertook with Rightmove, RICS and Monmouthshire Building Society, which looked to identify and quantify the value differential between the most energy efficient homes and the least energy efficient homes, clearly defined a green premium for energy efficient homes. But the green premium will only take us so far. At some point, that green premium or the energy efficient qualities of those homes will become the norm, and people will expect that as a standard. So those properties that don't keep in step with those homes and don't undertake the retrofit measures will then be brown discounted, so they won't retain their value.
It's on one of the questions.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. So just my view on mortgage advisors and why this is important. So I think you mentioned lots of money that needs to be spent on improving properties. So I think kind of selfishly, there's a big business opportunity there to get this right. But I also think more from a customer relationship perspective, I think it's a really good conversation to have to say, you know, I'm not just talking to you about your mortgage and your PT, but I'm actually taking more of an interest in the house that you live in, your home. You know, how can we build a plan that might help you to improve that home over a number of years? Because people might not spend 20,000 straight away on heat pump and insulation, but you might be able to afford a 5,000 that's part of a further advance. To do a part of your plan.
Exactly.
But the important thing for me is if every household has a plan to say this is how you're going to get from point A to the end goal, at least you can be working to that over time. And I think you guys play a really important part in that journey, actually.
Absolutely.
So there's some really good questions, actually. There's a couple of questions relating to, so there's one about regions and also one about could properties become unmortgageable? So to put them together, so are certain regions going to be hit worse? And could properties become unmortgageable, do you think?
With regards to the mortgageability, lenders are already looking at the transitional risks within their back books, or looking at properties that could become stranded assets. So I would hesitate to say unmortgageable, but would they be unfavourably mortgaged? Potentially.
I'm glad you answered my question there. That's good. Very good. That's fine. I'll come on to. So, and the second bit. What about the regional bit?
I mean, you would hope that net zero is a UK-wide target, so there needs to be support across the length and breadth. Now, I appreciate there are some areas that are more exposed to climate events, so coastal erosion and
it's
areas.
cold in Gateshead, by the way.
Pardon?
It's cold in Gateshead. It's like, but that's a real point. I think the physical risks of climate we haven't really talked about. We've talked a lot about energy.
Yeah.
But flood zones really important. Properties near cliff coastal erosion really important and increasing. So I think more and more insurers in particular are starting to look at those components.
Exactly, and lenders are going to have to start setting aside capital to weigh against that risk as climate risk becomes more of a real danger.
Definitely. And my view on the unmortgageable is the last thing we need is energy prisoners. That's just horrible alongside standard mortgage prisoners. But I think Cerys mentioned that there is definitely an emerging gap in value of G's to A's. And to an extent you probably need that, because how else do you encourage people to take action to improve their properties unless there's value back from it? So I think a natural outcome will be that certain G-rated properties may be worth a lot less than a similar A-rated property.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily a bad outcome. The bad bit about that is if the G-rated properties are the people who just can't afford to do anything and they become stuck. And that for me is where the government need to support their kind of their help on the people who are genuinely struggling here.
Yeah.
So it could be a problem. Okay, so there's the next one. There's a lot of mortgage ones actually. Do you think could green requirements of retrofitting, do you think it might actually start to dissuade people, first-time buyers, from buying certain properties because of the increased cost?
Potentially. I mean, it's not just the increased running costs that they would be undertaking in buying a property that does need retrofit, but it's also then taken into consideration potentially tens of £1,000s of retrofit works that needs to be undertaken on that property. So, you know, the new build properties that we work with, so we've got two new build developments in Wales where they are net zero carbon ready. So those properties need no retrofit measures from now. There's no gas to the developments. They have their ground source heat pumps, they've got their PV, their battery, so there's no retrofit cost. And in comparison to a new build EPC-B property, the residents of those homes are already paying 40% less than an EPC-B property new build. So if they've come from a mid-terrace Victorian townhouse, then they're saving significantly more. So there are certainly benefits to buying an already sort of good-to-go packaged.
And that's my view. I think the new build sector has a really good story to tell here. And I don't know if many of you have seen it, but Barratt's have got a video on a home called the Z Home. Have a look at it online because it's literally stacked full of all the modern technology you can think of. And effectively the energy bills are nothing, I think, in a home like that. So it is possible to get things down to zero, or even net positive. Yeah. So if you've got enough solar panels and battery packs, exactly, you can sell it back to the grid.
Do you know how much the grid paid to turn off renewable technologies last year?
I think you do, I don't, sorry.
£1 billion. How
much?
£1 billion. The National Grid paid renewable technologies £1 billion last year to turn off because there was no demand. So when there was a very windy night, for example, they asked the wind turbines to turn off because there was no demand. There were no batteries to be filled. There were no EVs to be charged. There were no heat pumps to start running. So as the retrofitting of properties starts to grow and grow, we can help the National Grid decarbonise more quickly. We can take that surplus energy when it goes into minus figures, and the National Grid will pay you to charge your car, charge a battery.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the energy self-sufficiency thing is really interesting. So if you have a battery pack in your house, you charge it with solar panels, and I've seen you can actually bring your car back, and if there's a spare energy in your car, you can use it to run your house, which is kind of a fully integrated sort of energy solution of the future.
Absolutely, and cars have got massive batteries. So a normal house, the houses that we've got building at the moment, that's a 5 kilowatt battery. EVs have got 22 kilowatt batteries, and there are some, not all EVs, but some where they can do energy transfers. So can you imagine having that much flexibility in how you run your home and your car?
Find your local free charging point at Tesco and run your fridge off it, basically. Brilliant. Do you think there needs to be further innovation in green mortgages?
Absolutely. So there is a BEIS grant funding opportunity at this very moment, the Green Home Finance Accelerator Fund, or GFAF as we call it. And the GFAF is a £20 million pool of funding for lenders to look at innovative ways to increase the adoption of renewable technologies within the mortgage market. So looking at green mortgages or further advances that support the retrofit of the current housing stock. So the bidding process for that is open until the 16th of December, and that's then going to run from January next year until March 2025.
Cool. And from our perspective, there was one of these bidding processes a few years back. So Lloyds bid for some of that funding, and we launched the home energy savings tool that some of you may see.
That was in GFIF.
GFIF, yeah.
The Innovation Fund.
Sorry, that's what you meant. And this, I think for me, this is like one of these Club V country stories. So you provide a really good service. There are other tools available that will do similar things. So I just think the more we can get traction on the use of tools in the market, the better it is for homeowners and all of us. From a lending perspective, I think we need more innovation. So we've seen quite a few of the cashback for A's and B's, which is, I think part of that is it's quick to do, whereas the more complicated things that I think are more helpful will be things related to affordability calculation. So if you're only spending £100 on energy a year as opposed to £400 a month,
Mm-hmm.
you should be able to borrow more to buy that efficient property.
Exactly.
That I think needs to come through.
Well, that's what the Valuer project, which was funded by the same funders as the Lloyds tool, the Valuer project worked with Monmouthshire, and they realised that they recalibrated their affordability calculator so that someone buying one of the new build properties that I've mentioned, the zero carbon ready, they could borrow up to £12,000 more without changing any of the factors of their affordability, just because the running costs of that property were so much lower.
Sure. I'm not. How are we for time? Is anyone keeping time? Because I'm literally not keeping time. How many? Sorry. 8 minutes. Okay. Right. Fantastic. So there's a question here: should there be greater transparency about lender backbook ratings? So I think my answer to that is I'm not sure we'd sort of consolidate it as a view of our backbook, but every property the rating's visible anyway, so you can dip into the EPC register and find out.
Free register.
I suspect that through things like our ESG commitments, though, and our annual results, that will become a much bigger focus. So I'm not sure how much it would help, because for me, from your perspective, it's probably more about the property that of the customers that you're sat in front of. That's where you can talk about how you can improve that and the options that they've got. But I think you will get more transparency of lender back books anyway. View on that?
Well, BEIS consulted at the beginning of last year. They haven't released their findings yet, because I think they know quite the effect it's going to have on the industry when they do release those findings. But BEIS basically asked that question. They wanted to know what impact lenders could have in the retrofitting of homes, and looking specifically at potentially a league table of lenders and the rating of their back book. And once you know the energy efficiency of your back book, then surely the next target is, okay, well, what can you do to improve that? Which I think is a scary prospect for lenders at the moment.
And I think someone just asked the question, do we think broker choice of lenders may become more driven by green credentials? I think totally. I think we're moving into an increasing world of personalisation of mortgage products, so that could be based on the person themselves or the property. Mm-hmm. I would fully expect sourcing systems to start to reflect different aspects of green lending as we get much more into that kind of, I say, personalised pricing, but for personalised REIT property as well. Mm-hmm. Do you think the same, Cerys?
Yeah, definitely. And having a multitude of green lending products that could service different types, whether it's a family that's buying an EPC-G property with the actual purpose of renovating that property and creating a mechanism where they can have access to like a new build mortgage where you or a self-build mortgage where you release funds incrementally. There should be a variety of different green lending products out there to suit different demographics.
I suppose a big immediate challenge is in the buy-to-let market. So how can you think of a product that might help landlords get their properties up to scratch effectively?
Exactly.
Right, a couple of last questions on here before the final close, and it won't be, I don't think, a magic wand question. A really simple one. Is Sero national?
Yes, we are. So we were founded in Cardiff, but we're slowly creeping over the border.
And how do people find you?
Well, we've got it's just Sero.life, the website. Or find me in the queue for lunch.
Cool. And then slightly more technical one. I've got a view on this. I don't know whether you do. But how will leasehold apartments be dealt with? There are several severe limitations on what works can be done.
Absolutely. And it's not, it's apartments in general, but if you think about it more broadly than that, it's also terraces of properties. If you've got mixed tenure within a terrace, then it's not as simple as doing pick and mix. This property needs external wall insulation, but the next door neighbour doesn't want to do it. Well, then realistically, the thermal bridge that would be caused by externally insulating one of those properties would have a negligible effect on the neighbouring property, because it would cause damp, condensation, mould, all the horrible elements that you don't want from retrofitting a property. So much the same as apartment blocks, leasehold, mixed tenure. It's a big problem, and it's a really tricky one to tackle. I don't have a straightforward answer for it at the moment.
No, and my view is there's a lot on the freeholder here, because you can't you can't insulate a single apartment in a block, can you?
No.
So the freeholder has to think about the standards applied right across the building. It's a bit like cladding, which has been a terrible problem to solve, but it feels like we're getting much closer to solving the cladding problem. And interestingly, some of the cladding solutions might actually fix some of the sustainability solutions as well. Housing associations have kind of been through that process already, so I think it's definitely helped them deliver their sustainability outcomes. So I'm going to ask the last question.
Okay.
So this is it. So people in the room, really important to us, really important to sustainability. Two bits of the question. So what would you ask of the people in this room that they go away and do, and what opportunities would that present for them?
Okay, so the main thing I would ask is just plant the seed. Just mention what's coming down the tracks. Even if your customer, they pay no notice of it. If they keep getting this messaging sort of in their peripheral, when that penny does drop, that, oh, okay, I do have a role to play in decarbonisation, it is going to impact me financially, then at least they'll have the bigger picture. So, oh, my mortgage broker mentioned that. Oh, actually, the estate agent mentioned that. Oh, actually, X, Y, and Z mentioned that. It builds the bigger picture, and it allows them to understand how all elements of housing and the way that we live within our housing feeds into the decarbonisation of the housing stock within the UK. That could then lead to better relationships with your customers. It leads to maybe some thought pieces that you could issue to your customers, some guidance to your customers. And I think it's just a big opportunity for you to do the right thing, but also to enhance your own awareness. So carbon literacy at the moment, it is a problem, and I'm working on creating resources so that people can understand, whichever level they want to, whether they want a really high level just so they can start the conversation, or whether they want to dig deeper and granularly understand what needs to be done. Then I'm working to create resources that you can use yourselves, but also pass on as well.
Superb. Cerys, thank you very much. So passionate about the topic. Good ask. I think we've finished. We'll finish on that point.
Thank you
very
so
much, everybody.